a phantom.
Back in the mid-2000s, there was a cartoon on Nickelodeon airing at the time named Danny Phantom, a show about a half-ghost, half-human kid named Danny Fenton who would end up fighting all of these evil ghosts from the Ghost Zone that came to his hometown and school every so often to terrorize its citizens. It was a fun, half-action, half-comedy series with lots of wit and especially some interesting villains. Running for only 3 seasons, Danny Phantom seems to be one of the most popular Nickelodeon shows that people seem to be clamoring for some type of revival or continuation of, and while whether or not that happens is entirely up in the air, there's no denying that I heavily enjoyed the first season of this show back in the day. Now, I was never as big of a Nickelodeon fan as I was Cartoon Network. The channel was always second fiddle to me, but I didn't mind turning it on every once in a while if Cartoon Network was airing something I didn't particularly care for, and Danny Phantom just so happened to be one of those shows I would end up catching every now and again. In truth, I'm only familiar with the first season of the series, but I've heard many things about how Season 3 took a 90-degree nosedive due to how expensive it was to produce, as well as its writing quality being a total mess compared to the seasons that had come before. But enough about that. I figure with it now being October at the time of this video's release, what better way to celebrate the spirit of Halloween than with some games that in a way could be catered towards the holiday. I've been in a Danny Phantom mood as of late, so I figure, why not? Let's tackle the Danny Phantom games next. Hence the subject of today's video. Danny Phantom, the Ultimate Enemy, based on the 44-minute TV special of the same name released exclusively on the Gameboy Advance. There was originally supposed to be a console version of this game made to release alongside it, but for unknown reasons that title never made it to store shelves, so unfortunately the handheld game is the only version that I have available to look at today. The structure of the game follows the exact progression of the animated special that it's based on, so spoilers for the Ultimate Enemy in case anybody for whatever reason doesn't want to be spoiled on that. Huh, funny. Haven't done this in a while, but it's time for an episode recap. The story begins with an evil Danny Phantom, simply named Dan Phantom, terrorizing Amity Park 10 years in the future. Turns out Danny Boy here became evil because he cheated on the CAT exam, which caused him to become the most powerful ghost to ever exist, and the most evil one to boot. Cut to a time ghost named Clockwork, who is tasked with making sure Danny never becomes this evil menace in the future by going back in the past 10 years prior and, well, killing him. Yeah, unfortunately this is a time travel plot where the time travel doesn't make much sense, but that's not something I ever really care about in media anyways, I just wanted to acknowledge that. What I do care about is the fact that Box Ghost and the Lunch Lady had a child together.
I am Box Lunch, daughter of the Box Ghost and the Lunch Lady!
Ew.
What the fuck? So apparently, this special confirms that ghosts reproduce. Wasn't that just great? Anyways, Box Lunch here is sent to kill Danny before he can become evil, but she fails to do so, so then Skulltech 9.9, a fusion between Skulker and Technus, arrives on the scene to try and kill him a second time, but they fail too, and then Danny, Sam, and Tucker get sent to Clockwork's lair where they find these time medallions which allow them to travel into the future until they take them off. In doing so, this establishes that they are immediately returned to their present time. Clockwork just so happens to arrive on the scene and attempts to kill Danny right then and there, but the three of them escape 10 years into the future where they meet Danny's evil self, as well as an older Valerie who's become a ghost hunter trying to stop Dan once and for all. And after a near-death experience, Sam and Tucker remove their medallions and return to the present day, whereas Dan gets the upper hand on Danny and fuses the time medallion into him so that it cannot be removed and sends him rocketing into the Ghost Zone, while Dan himself's gotta get back to the past Samurai Jack to make sure that the events that made Danny evil do not get interrupted so that he does not cease to exist. He dons this illusion to look like his younger self and proceeds to cheat on the CATs using the answers that Danny unintentionally stole earlier on in order to seal his fate and make sure that all of his friends and family meet at the same location at the same time just outside of the Nasty Burger that evening where a spicy new sauce is set to explode. Honestly, I think that part could have been a little bit better, but hey, I guess that's just the silliness shining through. Meanwhile, Danny ends up encountering 10 years older versions of his fellow archenemies like Johnny 13 and Ember McLean. Jazz, who, knowing of Danny's ghost powers and realizing that Dan is pretending to be Danny in the present day, sends the Fenton boomerang introduced by their parents at the start of the episode straight into the Ghost Zone from 10 years in the past, where presumably it kept flying dying until the exact time that Danny was being attacked. From here, Danny escapes and goes to find Vlad, who tells him of how Danny came to him 10 years prior after his family and friends all died, and asked him to separate his ghost self from his human self, which Vlad did, but then his ghost self ripped Vlad's ghost self from him, fused with Vlad's ghost self, and then killed Danny's human self before going on a 10-year-long rampage that continued on until the time of their conversation. Danny then requests Vlad to rip the time medallion out of him so he can be sent back to the past, to which Vlad complies, and then Dan proceeds to fight him until Danny gets a new ghost scream power, the same one that Dan was seen using at the start of the episode: the ghostly wail. Danny then realizes that it wasn't him cheating on the CATs that caused him to turn evil, it was everyone he ever loved, and Principal Lancer, dying in a fiery explosion. That's right, it was originally canon that Danny Phantom's family fucking died. Anywho, Danny defeats Dan and Clockwork lets him save his family. Danny gets warped back to the time of the CATs, hands in the answers that he stole, and then the episode ends with a conversation about him and Jazz regarding the fact that she knew he was half ghost the entire time. And so, the plot of the game follows exactly that, minus the scenes with Dan in the present where he pretends to be Danny, but otherwise it's the same story except it's told via these sprites and text boxes in typical Game Boy Advance fashion. Yeah, I figured it would be better to just show the actual episode in this case, rather than talk over these static text boxes. And unfortunately, as far as getting the story of the game across, I'd say it's not entirely clear about everything taking place given the fact that you don't see a lot of the action, and most of the characters' dialogue is just cut down lines from the show. You can still sort of follow what's going on, but it still helps immensely to have actually seen the special before playing the game. At the very least, the sprite work is pretty solid, both for the cutscenes and during actual gameplay. The ghosts are very distinct from one another, and all of Danny's moves are pretty fluid. Of course, with this being a GBA title, there were unfortunately only 2 face buttons available, so all of Danny's combat attacks were relegated strictly to the B button, which in most 2D platforming games isn't a big deal, but this is a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up where the core gameplay is relegated strictly to walking left and right and beating up enemies. There's hardly any platforming, seeing as almost all of the stages are relegated to hallways, and given that the game functions strictly on one plane of existence, you don't have the element of depth to work with, which other beat-em-ups like Streets of Rage or Scott Pilgrim vs. the World or even Castle Crashers tend to take advantage of. Basically, it's a very simplified version of that, where the only controls you need are left and right, jump, which is relegated to the A button, and attack on the B button. It's not even a case like Samurai Jack the Amulet of Time where you can perform different attacks based on the direction you press. Nope, it's specifically the number of times you press the B button that dictates how many times you can score a hit on your combo chain. The most platforming you ever have to do is just jump over a few gaps, but even if you fall in, it's not the end of the world because you just get sent back to the beginning of the stage. No lives or anything like that, the game just says try again and leaves it at that. But honestly, despite all of that, I think that this game is pretty fun. Sure, it wears out its welcome pretty quickly because the gameplay never really changes throughout the game, but I will say that all of the levels are short enough that you'll quickly find yourself moving on to the next stage in no time. None of these stages took me more than 2 minutes to beat, and considering that each stage introduces a new environment, at the very least you'll always have something different to look at. There isn't too much challenge in this game though. Most of the enemies are pretty easy to beat and you get a lot of health, even on the normal difficulty, and I really enjoy the variety of ghost designs. You've got these weaker ghosts that tend to strike from above, while these heavier ghosts tend to have more health, but are also more prone to your ground attacks. My biggest complaint would simply be that it feels like you're fighting the exact same horde of enemies in every room you go to. Every time you start a stage, you're fighting the same ghosts mixed together in what feels like the same amounts as well. I've been showing an uninterrupted clip during this segment of the video in order to illustrate this point. Every room I've gone into has consisted of the same ghosts in roughly the same amounts with minor differences in challenge. It would have been cool if instead it was structured to where the first room consisted of a healthy mix of enemies, and then the second room is full of nothing but the pink and blue floating ghosts, and then the third room you enter is chock full of the medium weight gray ghosts or something like that, just to mix things up. This unfortunate lack of enemy allocation leads to things feeling pretty samey combat wise, but like I said, at the very least the levels are short, so you're constantly entering new environments, all of which match the show's art style out particularly well. Despite this minor detriment, it was still fun getting to run around as Danny while fighting all of these different ghosts. And I should also mention that his dash in particular is really cool because when you pull it off, you can actually fly through walls and enemies, which is honestly about as fun as it sounds as you zoom across the stage. The game also features a level up system where at the end of each stage you get ranked on things like the number of enemies you defeated, your highest combo, and the time you took. After each stage you get experience, and with enough experience you level up to learn new moves and abilities such as the 5th and 6th combo attack, the Ghostly Whale special move, increased offense, a jump kick, and so on. And then there's the boss fights. Personally, if you ask me, this is the best part of the game. Yeah, no kidding, the boss fights you get to fight are actually really fun and keep you engaged in the action because they pose a decent challenge and really make you think on your feet without being brutally unfair. Except for Dan Phantom, that is, the final boss, of course, who can literally grab you after any potential attack combo you make on him where he damages you and heals himself at the same time. And can I just say, I hate bosses that can heal themselves. He actually gave me quite a hard time to where I almost got stuck fighting this guy until I decided to try a different strategy besides the basic 5-hit combo. Remember that dropkick attack I mentioned? Gotta love it. Regardless though, these boss fights are pretty fun, whether it be battling Skulltech 9.9 or Valerie. It's easily what I looked forward to the most as I progressed through the game, and after I beat the entire thing and entered the passwords that I found online, I discovered there's actually a boss rush mode, which I knew was going to be an instant play for me. Funnily enough, Danny's Ghostly Whale attack is something you only unlock at level 5, around the halfway point through the campaign. The first time I used it, I ended up getting sent back to Danny's human form without warning, which, to be fair, is also something that happens in the episode, but I had no idea how to turn back because the game never teaches you this. Turns out that if you press the select button, you can actually swap between Danny's ghost form and human form, but Epic Gamer's Shadow Streak over here had no idea this was a thing for like the entire game. You can literally see me wandering around back and forth here not knowing what to do because I thought I screwed myself over using the screen nuke attack. Nope. Turns out you actually build your special meter by turning back into a human, but I didn't know that for almost the entire game. I literally thought I was restricted to using the Fenton Thermos in order to pick up the ectoplasm from the defeated ghost in the levels. I had no idea I could build up my special meter by transforming out of ghost form because the game never says you can do that. God, I felt so stupid in that moment, but at the very least that was probably for the better because, I'm not gonna lie, this screen nuke is so unbelievably broken that I was literally able to abuse it for the entire boss rush. All I had to do was transform into a human, walk around for 5 seconds, transform back to a ghost, and boom, I could screen nuke them. I should mention you can also use a beam attack and turn invisible to become invincible briefly, and they were perfectly okay abilities, but I hardly use them and they pale in comparison to the Ghostly Whale. Seriously, all challenge was lost when I discovered how to break the game, so unfortunately I don't think this title would be as fun if I just abused this strategy for the entire campaign. If you were to play through this game, I would recommend trying to avoid abusing that as much as possible. I suppose it's also worth mentioning that at 2 different points in the game, you're actually put into this 2D side-scrolling shooter stage where you have to shoot off ghosts while staying alive until you make it to the end of the stage. It's a little random all things considered, but I think it does a good job at breaking up the pace. I just wish that this gameplay was fleshed out a little bit more. Still though, it's a nice distraction from fighting the same 3 enemies over and over again, so I can't really complain, and it's not too intrusive, so I welcome the addition. The boss rush wasn't the only unlockable side mode, however. Alongside that came 3 additional mini-games. They're pretty basic all things considered, but the fact that they're even included at all is pretty cool if you ask me. One has you timing jumps as you dodge Skulker's blasts, one has you testing your knowledge of Danny Phantom lore with Tucker and Sam, and the last sees you playing target practice with Danny as you blast ghosts and reload through the school's hallway. They're harmless additions, so Zero complaints here. And then of course you also unlock mission mode when you go back into the main game. Ultimately it's just an excuse to play through the entire game again with additional bosses at the end of each world, but it does have its own plotline in which Vlad ends up taking over the role as the final villain, so that's cool at least. It's a neat way to essentially bring in a new game plus mode since your character's level carries over from when you beat the original campaign. I like that the game does a lot to try and bring in a replay factor here, especially given how short it is, because that's one thing I could definitely say for sure. I would wish this game was a lot longer than it is if fighting the ghost wasn't as repetitive as it got. But yeah, all in all, I'd say Danny Phantom: The Ultimate Enemy for the Game Boy Advance is a pretty fun handheld game. It's short, don't get me wrong, but if you're looking for a game that can keep you occupied for an hour, or you're just looking for a fun Danny Phantom game to play, then by all means give this one a shot. It's not bad. Kind of a shame that Danny Phantom never got a full-on console game to himself, because if it implemented a lot of these mechanics, I could see a genuinely good game coming out of this one. Oh well, at the very least next time we'll get to see what his sequel game was like as I take a look at Danny Phantom in Urban Jungle, released for both the Nintendo DS and Game Boy Advance this time. I can't wait to see what it has in store. Until next time, Shadowstreak, signing off.